it helps to add myself into the stream. Good evening and happy Sunday, everybody. Uh, when Dr. Peterson was in Fargo, I went and got tickets and went to go watch his presentation. I thought it was too good an experience. You know, what are the odds that somebody's going to come to Fargo in February? Um, and he said something, and he didn't follow up on it, but it was a really interesting thought. He said Richard Dawkins made the point sometime back in the 70s or 80s when he was busy doing real science, um, that every creature that you can meet is actually a microcosm of the environment around it. Uh, every creature, let's say on Earth, that you meet is a microcosm of its environment. And if you had sufficient patience and the right set of tools, somebody from a different planet would be able to figure out pretty well what sort of environment any animal came from, right? You know, you can look at a fish, and if you were able to study it closely enough, you would probably be able to figure out that it was an aquatic animal. You would look at the gills and the way they function. You would look at the air bladders that provide the buoyancy, all of those sorts of things. You'd be able to figure out this is a animal that's mostly in the water. You could look at a bird. You could look at how it's capable of flying. You'd be able to figure out what the gravity and the average air density of Earth would be just by close examination of the properties of the bodies of various creatures. But Dr. Peterson just kind of threw that in there, and it was a very odd thing. It was, I mean, it was a fine presentation. He's a fine presenter, but that one little bit didn't fit in with anything else that he said, and I was really hoping he was going to follow up on that, because if that's true, if it is true that every creature is actually a microcosm of its environment, and that you're able to figure out things about its environment just by examining the creature, that has some um, very interesting conclusions that we could draw if we were to point that at ourselves, to not look at fish or birds or giraffes or whatever, to look at human beings, right? And what are human beings like? And what can taking that assumption, the assumption that you can tell the environment of a creature by studying the creature carefully, what can that tell us about ourselves? And just a couple of weeks ago, I was remembering a particular. Um, it was a PVK commentary on another conversation that Dr. Peterson had on his podcast with Stephen Fry, right, the actor. Um, and PVK got into preacher mode at the end of that, which we're always happy to see. And he started talking about, um, you know, he started talking about imagining, let's say, a peasant in the Middle Ages during a famine year, right? What sort of belief would have to be manifest in that peasant in order for them to move on? And he set up, we've got one over here who has faith in God. We have one over here who is just going to press forward no matter what, because they believe that everything around them has a purpose. Everything around them is created and ordered by God, and that the best way to behave is to keep on pressing forward in faith with God. And you're the person who has doubt or despair. They don't think that, they don't believe that. They don't act in accord with that. Well, how do you think that story ends? The person whose faith, whose belief is strong enough to push them through a trial, they're the ones that succeed. They're the ones where, if an actual opportunity manifests itself, they're the ones who are actually going to take opportunities that are offered to them. Whereas those who give in to despair, those who Do not believe that, we'll say, the universe is a good place, that being is good, that it's worthwhile to keep on moving forward, even when you can't see how things are going to work out. That one is not going to thrive. That one is not going to survive. And so, if we take those two facts together, we take our major premise that every creature is a microcosm of its environment. We take the minor premise that human beings who believe in a transcendent order outside of themselves are likely to thrive in any circumstance. And we come to the conclusion of that. Seems that evolution proves what all men call God to actually exist. Because we, being shaped in our environment, being shaped by the world we live in, it's, we'll say, pragmatically true that faith in God gives us an evolutionary advantage, and those are the folks who are able to last into the future. So, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Evolution, rather than creating a scientific utopia or supposed scientific utopia, actually proves the existence of God. Is it an airtight proof? Is it a type of proof that commands the intellect such that you can't not believe it? I don't think it goes quite that far, but it goes far enough for me on a Sunday night when I've been sitting in front of the computer extra today. On account of the Moby Dick Book Club, which is still a lot of fun. You still can catch up to us. We haven't read that far. And if you're curious about the Moby Dick Book Club, just check it out. It's also on my channel. So that's kind of my little spiel right there. I finished the first month of Canon Law School here in Washington, D.C., second summer of Canon Law School. And so, it's it doesn't feel like all that long ago, because it really wasn't, that I was starting class, and my finals are now complete, and I start the next set of classes Monday. Emma says, I watched the first episode and it was great. Might jump in later in the summer after family vacation next week. Family vacation is very important. Because I'm sent out to Washington, D.C., family vacations are harder. So I do think you should go ahead and do that. And you should be able to catch up with us. Speaking of the Moby Dick Book Club, here's Mark, my faithful companion. You've changed your shirt since earlier today. I'm sure there's a good reason for it.
Yes, spaghetti.
Well, it's a bold move to wear a white shirt and eat spaghetti. So not every gambler, wins every time they sit down at the table.
Wasn't going to mess up my cool Moby Dick shirt with spaghetti stains. So.
Oh, I see. Well, hey, Emma liked the first episode of the Moby Dick Book Club. So we must be on the right path.
That's all the authority I need right there.
Yeah. If Emma likes it, it's probably good business there. So, do you think that evolution proves God's existence?
Well, I mean, that should be obvious to everybody by now. Certainly everybody watching. Like, this is one of those things, like, if you didn't see that, what else are you missing? There's a lot of problems. Like, the first problem that everybody misses is Darwin did not write a, quote, theory of evolution, right? What he wrote was called The Origin of Species. And species are a sub-ontology within science. So he wrote of the origin of where this observation of species comes from. And people have somehow expanded this into some kind of origin of life thesis. Which he did not write. And it's not in there because he was a good God-fearing man. So I don't know where people are getting this from. My problem with Dawkins is that Dawkins' logic is horrific. I mean, he's just absolutely horrific. I'm like, really? Yeah, you get about. I didn't read the whole Blind Watchmaker because it just like at a certain point I was like, all right. But for somebody who
But
ran evolution, huh?
was his the major premise of my argument that every creature is a microcosm of its environment? Like, I
So
don't know
here,
how you get around that.
well, no. But here's the problem with it. So I want to give some context. So if you read the Blind Watchmaker and you get at least halfway through, because I'm sure I got halfway through, uh, what you realize is that Dawkins just makes several basic errors in thought. Like, there's no logic going on. Believe me, he's not a logistician. He's just not. Might have other good qualities. I haven't seen them, but I'm sure somebody could make a case. And the word environment is very slippery. What do you mean by environment? So fish and bird, at some point, they're in the same environment. Birds aren't a microcosm of the environment fish are in, though. Oops. But so he's doing the magic trick. We're just gonna environment, of course, and not define it. But actually, fish and birds is perfect because you couldn't derive the environment from fish and birds without a bunch of baseline assumptions. So, for example, a fish in a methane atmosphere that was full of methane, where gases and liquids are very close, guys. I don't know what to tell you.
They're both fluids.
Gases and liquids behave the same in a lot of ways, not every way. So gills work in a gaseous environment. You sure they're swimming around? What does swim mean if your entire atmosphere is, you know what I mean? Now, they, on the other hand, saying that is also the same as saying life is a self-similar fractal at all levels. It's like, oh, okay. But I think Pageau says it best. So there you go. I don't. The idea that you're fitted to the environment is the fundamental idea that Darwin put forward. And so for Dawkins to say it years later is like, oh, Darwin already said that. Like, the origin of species is about how the thing that appears to be fitted to an environment became that way. Like, that's what his book's about. So I don't, like, at some point I'm like, did Dawkins say anything, or did he just repeat what Darwin already said?
Which, like, I just repeat what the Bible says. So, it's a real strategy.
Well, right. But the thing is, like, the model Darwin uses for his book is the biblical origin of species, which is also the origin of life, by the way, right? Because the origin of species of the Bible is, yeah, Adam named all the animals. Problem solved. And the trick science plays is it says, we've also named all the animals, but we have a system.
Yeah, but their names are lame because they've got like names for 3 different subspecies of caterpillars. And
oh, really?
Adam, well, yeah, right, because and it's like,
hello,
how many bugs are there is a major problem for evolutionary types, and they just solve it by naming indefinitely, rather than just being like, oh, that's a caterpillar. Moving on.
You divide the world. You find ways in which things are similar or different. And, John Vervaeke talks about this, right? Things are infinitely the same and infinitely different, which means all science is arbitrary. Now, it turns out that's not entirely accurate, but actually, logically, it follows. What does that tell you about logic? It tells you that observation can do logic, and logic can't justify itself, right? On the basis of things like numbers.
You only can go as far as your premises in logic.
Right. Well, and your starting axioms matter entirely.
Yeah.
What all logic does is allow you to go backwards from a conclusion or forwards from a starting axiom. That's it. It doesn't do anything else. And that's what I mean by Dawkins. Like, what Dawkins does in his book is he misses all the important facts. even though he writes about them. I'm like, dude, you ran evolution on a computer, because I did too, several times. Like, it's not like you can write that pretty quickly, actually, in pretty much any language. And you missed all the good stuff, all the interesting and important stuff. Like, really? That's fascinating. Like, one of the things people don't realize is that in a large enough set, so we'll say a large enough environment, I don't know, let's pick something random and completely abstract, like the Earth, we know nothing about apparently. And if it's really large and you start up your evolutionary conditions, the odds that only one thing of one type will be created basically get to zero real fast. And the odds that similar things will be created from different starting points also get to zero real fast. And people don't realize that. But what does that mean? Well, that means single origins for species are not likely. So, not that they can't happen or don't happen, but also it's mathematically no. That has huge implications for how they think about it.
I haven't quite followed, so let me see if I can repeat it back.
Mm-hmm.
You're setting up a simulation, and you just try and run things, and you're trying to run them based on the rules of logic. So logic lets you start from one point and get to another, or lets you work back from some point.
You set up some rules, right? They don't. Yeah, they necessarily are logic because it's a computer. But you set up some set of rules and some environment. And the environment is starting conditions and boundaries or constraints. Mm-hmm. But the thing is, there's a limited number of starting points. But the fact that you find a starting point, we'll say randomly, because that's the term they use in computers. You can argue about how random computers can be. That's a big argument in computer science. The idea that starting point is only going to happen once in time or space or both vanishes to zero for a sufficiently large set. And so if you say all caterpillars have a single origin and it's on the some place, maybe it's India or something, right? The odds that happened once and only in India are basically zero when you have something the size of the Earth.
Okay, so we've got that one point, and then you had a second point, which seemed like it was saying the exact opposite, that things wouldn't start independently and converge on the same thing.
No, things converge on the same thing all the time, even though they start.
Okay.
Because the environment
and that's
environmental
actually
constraints. Environmental constraints are they don't have to be the same. They only have to be similar enough. And actually, like I said, like if you actually program your own evolutionary, it's really easy. You'll see this. Like it's right there in front of you. It's like, oh, that's cool.
Which is why we have deer in North America and they have kangaroos in Australia. And they're pretty daggone similar. Like they have the same sort of diet, same sort of speed, same sort of jumping. They hold the same sort of niche in the environment. They're a little different, but
deer developed in different places at similar times or just at offset times, independently. Mm-hmm. Like it wasn't all Pangea, and then the deer spread out throughout the years. That didn't happen.
What about American badgers and European badgers?
Yeah, there's this is the thing that puzzles me. There's tons of examples of this. Like all the species with the exception of a handful. So I'm like, this point seems obvious and observable and no one talks about it. And like, I get why you wouldn't want to if you want science to be important or interesting or useful, but also I think truth matters. So,
Sorry, evolution isn't as exciting as it was. Apparently.
Evolution ain't what it used to be. Sure, we could go with that. That would be it.
That was an interesting thing that I noticed. Interesting thing that I noticed is, when I was at a parish, we had like a small group of kids who wanted more substantial, education, because they actually showed up to church on Sunday and knew what was going on. A real great group of kids. And I like came in with the big, okay, here's the Catholic response to evolution, which is basically, that's interesting. Don't freak out about it, right? And like I had the whole thing down. I had like, what do people mean 6 different things when they say evolution, which is really one of the tricky things about it, right? Because, differentiation of species over time isn't really that big a deal, but the idea that life can be caused entirely by mechanical forces, like that's a problem,
That's
So
an inference. Yeah.
right. And both of those are, at least in the way that people use the words, both are contained in that word evolution, right? And
Right.
these high schoolers, this was like back in 2021, they were like, okay, cool, that sounds about right. Whereas I just imagine myself in high school, 2008 to 2011, I think I would have been eating that up. I think I would have been really gripped by it. And maybe I'm not explaining this correctly, but it could be the case that it's just not as big a question anymore.
It could be. I mean, again, it depends what you're teaching. And yeah, the way people use the word evolution, they're referring to a handful of theories, a bunch of hypotheses, a ton of untestable things that aren't hypotheses. They don't rise to the level of science at all because they're not testable, right? And then an unbelievable number of inferences, just a ridiculous number of completely unscientific, quote, logical, like Dawkins. It just says a bunch of stuff. And how would you derive that a bird is flying through the air with the air density that we have with the oxygen content? Because mathematically you can't. So I don't know where he's getting this from, because there's lots of combinations that would produce a similar enough density, and there's enough variance in a bird sample of bird wings that it wouldn't tell you much about the atmosphere. I mean, tell you a bunch of things, right, within some parameters, but heck, they're not real tight parameters. You wouldn't derive our atmosphere from birds,
right?
For sure. There's no way.
Yeah. You could imagine like a smaller, denser planet with a lighter atmosphere. No, a heavier atmosphere.
A heavier atmosphere.
A smaller, denser planet with a heavier atmosphere would kind of equal out to the same buoyance there. Okay.
Right. And that's what I mean by he ran a computer program. This happens like you set these constraints, and the way things fit constraints, because the starting point matters, changes a lot. And so you can have like 6 things that fly and 5 flight mechanisms. That happens if you simulate evolution on a computer. And maybe he didn't. I mean, the one he describes in Blind Watchmaker is not a very sophisticated thing, and whatever. Whatever, that's fine, right? But like that principle's right there, right? And it's weird too, because they use evolutionary algorithms. They're called, and actually, it's one thing I'm actual expert in, a lot of experience with. They use these all the time to find endpoints. In other words, they'll use it to figure out new ways to make mobile robots. Like, how can we make a robot work that will go? One of the big things in robotics, I don't know if it's still true, but it was, how do you adapt a mechanical system to a world that we built, right? Because it has to help us. So it doesn't do any good if it just works in the world and, like, oh, it's got wheels. Oh, that's fantastic. Here's a set of stairs. I need my drink upstairs when I'm sick, right? And so they went on this quest to like, oh, what other forms of mechanical locomotion can we use? Well, the trick in that is that you already know the end result. Like, you want it to walk up a set of stairs. Like, that criteria is always built into these simulators. Not all the things. Like the evolution simulators I did didn't do things. You have to do some things like that, but it didn't do things like that in that way. It wasn't that specific, right? But like, they already know what they wanted to do. We wanted to get to the top of the stairs. We wanted to consume some maximum amount of energy and no more, right? Or we're going to throw it out. We want it to be able to do this with a certain level of speed, right? It can't be infinitely slow because there's actually lots of ways to make things come upstairs infinitely slowly. There's lots of locomotions that work for that, right? And we want it to be able to deal with different size stairs, right? Because there's different tread sizes and the whole different riser sizes, the whole thing, right? And so there's all these constraints built in that they're training to. This is also the problem with AI. It's the same problem because it's machine learning. It's actually the same. AI is a different type of machine learning. So what happens is you've built all this in and then gone, well, I can derive what this robot was for. I was like, well, of course you can, because you already did. It's a trick. Like, yeah, you already knew the answer, so of course you can rederive the answer. But if you didn't already know the answer, you couldn't rederive that answer. It's not possible. You're just missing the things are infinitely different part, the infinitely different and infinitely the same equation.
Well, somebody should tell Dr. Peterson that so he stops spreading misinformation.
Well, again, it's right if you have a fuzzy definition of environment and you never bother to think about it, and you have all the assumptions of our world. Sure. I mean, and this is like the whole life. Is there life in the universe question? I mean, this is what it depends on. They go, does it have to be carbon-based life? Because if not, that changes the numbers entirely. Because there's a bunch of methane planets, and like there's a bunch of planets that don't have any carbon.
Carbon-based life.
Well,
carbon's a very useful molecule. It can bind in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, there's two branches of chemistry.
Yeah, right? But like, are they saying that like it's impossible for life to exist without carbon, or are they saying that they wouldn't count it as life if it wasn't carbon?
No. The question is whether or not you would count something as life if it weren't carbon, because that changes the number and the places that you look.
Which seems, I don't know, that seems weirdly limiting. Like, why would you do that?
Well, no one knows what non-carbon based life.
We haven't experienced any kind of life that isn't carbon based.
Right. So if you want to talk about silicon based life or silica based life, you can't effectively, right? So then the question is, well, what are we looking for? So really all you're actually doing is twiddling the number. What's the likelihood of life in the universe? Well, do you have to exclude the set of planets without a detectable carbon? Because it just changes the number.
Right.
And they're making these numbers up anyway. They're making guesses about.
If we saw it,
I didn't hear that, Emma. Sorry.
I feel like we'd recognize it if we saw it. Non-carbon based life.
Sure. The problem is that the universe is too big and we can't go anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
But we know nothing about it. Yeah.
Like our best propulsion technology that we've theorized, we haven't even tried it, is launching nuclear weapons behind a spacecraft with a blast shield. And that'd get us up to a pretty decent chunk of the speed of light if we had enough nukes on board.
Yeah.
Good work.
I see why no one's done that.
That's where we're at.
Right. And but even that, the nearest next thing is still a lot of light years away. Yeah. So it's not that doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah, right. Like I said, that's the best we had. I didn't say it was good. I just said it was the best.
Right.
And this is the problem that sci-fi always has to solve.
Well, but yeah, I still insist that sci-fi is actually just ancient Greek philosophy done in a different frame. I've floated that on Clubhouse and other places, and people sort of think about that, and I'm like, no,
really mad.
Yeah, no, really, because what you're doing is you're just changing the environment and highlighting the behavior. Not in all cases. I mean, there's lots of terrible sci-fi. But...
Except I expect less story from ancient Greek philosophy, so I will give that to sci-fi.
Book 10 of the Republic. Just saying.
Okay.
I'll do a video on that soon.
Overall less.
No.
Homer.
I mean, that's the trouble with Aristotle is we don't have his dialogues, right? All we have are his
Right.
lecture
Yeah.
notes. It makes him a
Yeah, and
pain
they're
to
really
study
hard to
because
read.
they're really awful to read. I'm sure, Emma, have you ever tried it in the actual Greek?
I have. It's worse.
It's even worse in the actual Greek, right?
Because
we
there's
get
a whole
layered.
lot of constructions that are like Aristotle's shorthand. You know, you don't necessarily like write really good sentences when you're just making notes for yourself.
Yeah.
So there are a whole lot of sentences that you have to just stare at and be like, I guess this is what he means. And the translators usually smooth those out to make them like sound like a real sentence.
Every
But they're just
translation is an
awful at
interpretation.
what the real sentence is actually like. Every translation is an interpretation.
Yeah, it's a bear.
But yeah, I've read a decent chunk of the Poetics.
We have Jacob here to inform us that that's how people translate the Talmud. All right.
That's how people translate everything.
You have to interpolate a whole bunch of stuff. Yeah, and Aristotle's not the only one like that. I mean, anything that's fragmentary is going to be worse. But
Yeah. So anyway, what would Aristotle's dialogues be like? And those dialogues, they all have. And this is also the best homilies. They all have a narrative structure, even if they're not just telling a story.
that's
Right.
fair.
So it's like. Oh boy, here we go. Let's good old Malcolm and Simone. I've complained about them on this channel before. Is the Collins focus on the future helpful or distracting? Because it's because they're just so out there.
Yeah.
They're
an
is.
They're so
attraction.
wild and wacky.
They're a fashion.
They're
It's a
they're a
novelty.
fertility. It's a fertility techno cult. How many of those have you actually run across? Right?
Yeah.
A fertility techno cult there.
Actually,
So
I like the episode on.
I think the Collins is.
It was more
The
insightful.
thing is that they don't have the right grip on anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're kind of all over the place. Like
Yeah.
their whole shtick is we couldn't have. Well, there's two shticks. First of all, it's basically a lesbian relationship because he's not a man. That's actually really important. But also, they're traumatized by no IVF in the church, and so that's the problem they're trying to solve. And like I get that, but also no. And
Yeah, but that's what was interesting. They actually got beyond that.
No, they want to start their own religion. They didn't get beyond
Well, yes. No, they had an episode recently that was specifically talking about like Catholic stats and like basically what they think Catholicism could do better. So I listened just out of curiosity, and it was not as worthless as I expected it to be. And I found it interesting.
Yeah, but trying to start your own religion is still a no. So I'm still...
that is
Right,
definitely still a no. Especially when it's based on the fact that humans will eventually evolve into God. Singular God, not gods, plural.
Yeah. So there we go. We got a problem with their telos right there, right? What are they aiming at? What are they trying to do? They're trying to become God. Kids, that's never ended well. Parents, talk to your children about theosis. Do it the right way. Receiving it, right, and not trying to take it. Like, and that's what I mean. That's what I mean by the grip thing, right?
Yeah.
So much of life we have to receive from a posture of gratitude, and everything gets flipped on its head when we go out and try and grasp at it. When we try and grab it for ourselves. That goes all the way back to the book of Genesis, right? And many of the church fathers would say that when Adam and Eve were ready, God would have given them the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it wouldn't have done well all of this, right? So it's like they got the wrong aim, and even some of the good things they're trying to go at, right? Like, hey, God is pro baby, they're pro baby. Why aren't they getting along? It's because they got the wrong grip on these things. They're not receiving children. as a gift from God. They are going out and grabbing children like a commodity, like you would grab a tomato off of a store shelf.
Yeah, it's having mode instead of being mode. And the problem with the focus on the future is a very Protestant thing to do, in some sense, right? Is, well, we don't need to worry about the here and now, because we're and look, you have limits. You can think about the future, but if that's all you think about, you won't do anything while you're thinking. This happens to people this is the funny part. Like, I see this all the time with people. You can try to puzzle through, or you can do and actually learn, because you're not going to learn anything unless you do things in the world. Like, you got to participate. The rest of it is illusion. You're not going to learn anything from a book. I don't care how well you read it. That's not what's happening. You might be able to connect the book to your experience. I mean, that's the nice thing about the Moby Dick Book Club is it's set in New England. So you say, oh yeah, I know that place. Connect it to my experience, right? And then hopefully give that to others so that they can understand the connections he's making. But I'm not learning anything from Moby Dick. And that's not to say that I won't go back to New Bedford the next time I'm in New England and like see something in New Bedford that I didn't see before, because that's certainly going to happen, right? But that's leading to learning. That's not learning. Until I go to New Bedford, that ain't going to happen. And we get confused, right? We think, oh, we have the potential for the thing, and therefore we have the thing. The potential for the thing is also the future. You don't have the future, right? You have to work for the future that you want. It's hard. Life sucks.
Emma, just because I haven't, I've really only heard about the Collinses secondhand. It's amazing that I have so many opinions already.
Yeah, fair.
Why was Mr. Ewing here enraged on behalf of our co-religionists, other Catholics, I guess?
I mean, they did say a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily say insulting things, because they said a lot.
Did they say things that are objective?
Some of them were bad statistics, probably, but I don't know. They've done more research into this than I have. About like how many Catholics use or people who identify as Catholics use birth control, how many Catholics who go to church every week use birth control, things like that.
They go and run these studies at a Jesuit parish, I'm sure.
Probably, because I feel like you got to
remember that one
numbers than these studies did, but I wasn't. Again, I was expecting to be like enraged or like find the whole thing completely worthless, but they did have one bit where they like basically gave their advice. And obviously they've got like legalized IVF, which like, no. And fundamentally their whole problem is that they're fully consequentialists. That's their whole moral framework. So they're never going to understand the Catholic teachings, and they're never going to agree with it. And for me, I'm able to just like, well, that's a given. So now we'll just move on from that, and I'm not going to like focus on it anymore. But I understand that not everyone does that easily. But some of their advice I thought was actually workable and actually would probably be good. But I don't remember it right now. So I'm not.
You've forgotten all the good parts.
I did forget all the good parts. I'll have to go back. It was then really funny because I joined their Discord just to see what it was like. And they had a whole forum conversation on that thread. Well, yeah, but everybody does that anyway. They're not the first people to be like, this is the problem.
Yeah, I've had complete strangers tell me they think I should be allowed to get married. And it's like, who the heck are you, dude? And why are you telling me these things, right?
Yeah, every rando has that opinion.
That's kind of rude.
It's
really rude to say, I think that you've made a fundamental mistake in your life's direction. It's like, okay, we're going to have this conversation in the first 2 minutes that we met.
Right.
I mean, to be fair, if you're visibly pregnant in a grocery store, people will ask you if it was planned sometimes, and that's also awful. Like, people just think everybody's
that's a
entitled
violation
to
of
their opinions, and it's
Right.
like, I have never met you. I'm never going to meet you again.
Right, but that's the intimacy crisis.
So I don't want to tell you this, and
Yeah,
don't
that's
care what
just
you think about it.
right. We don't have politeness, right? And so we can't have proper intimacy. We don't know how close we should be in questioning other people. We just don't know anymore. We don't, we don't dress our parts. We don't, like, no one knows where they are, right? And the problem is, it's all universalism. Like, oh, everybody should be able to get married. What about some people who, like, can't get married, like, for whatever reason? Like, what do we do with those people when every profession, when they don't have a special place to be? Nobody thinks about that. Like, everyone's just like, no, everything should be universal.
Like, people should become priests, but you also, like, you talk to the people who think that everybody should be married, and you immediately run into, like, well, not narcissists or people I hate,
Exactly.
or like people with opinions I don't like. Like, how many
nobody believes it.
Allowed to get married think people who don't believe in abortion should be banned from getting married.
Right. And that's the problem. They don't even believe that. They're just applying it randomly to groups to solve a problem. And the age of gnosis, right? They want to have the knowledge that solves the problem, even if the problem is imaginary. And that's an imaginary problem. Like, if priests didn't want to be celibate, they wouldn't become priests. It's reasonable to assume that all the priests are okay being celibate. I don't know, right? Like, I don't get it. Like, and some people, I mean, there are people in the world, I don't want to say how many, who can't be married for whatever reason. Like, there's no attraction. Maybe the parts are broken. Like, there's all kinds of reasons. Huh?
They're eunuchs. That's
the
parts are broken. That's what you said.
Yeah.
There's a word for that. They're eunuchs. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tricky word. But yeah, I mean, and we need a place for these people in society, right? And it seems like a match that they could specialize in being a father to a larger flock than they could handle if their time and attention were being driven away from them, even by just being married and having to also take care of one woman. Because that's a lot, Emma. Sorry, Emma. But, like, that's a lot. You ain't got time to take care of your flock and a wife. No way. What are you going to do? There's going to be conflicts there that need to be resolved. I'm not saying they can't be resolved, but it's harder. It has to be, right? There's a time constraint. There's an energy constraint. There's an attention constraint. It has to be harder. And so it's not even ideal. Like, there's no framework you can put that in and say that's better, actually. And people don't realize that. They don't think it through. So they don't realize, no. It's actually better to have the people taking care of large flocks not married. It's a lot better, actually. It's not a little bit better, right? It's a lot better. And no one considers that.
I mean, some people consider that.
Catholic theologians consider that.
I don't think they should. No, I don't think they should. I think they should just accept. Like, this is the problem. Everybody wants to think about everything. It's like, why don't you just accept the things people already thought about and figured out 1,000 or 2,000 years ago? And don't you think that would free you up to be happier in life? Because it would. Like, just mathematically, okay, if we want to invoke the stupid science frame. Like, there's no frame where that's not better for you. And are you going to get wiped out by bad decisions? Yeah. Are they going to be your fault or somebody else's? Oh, well, honestly, I'd rather have it be somebody else. Father gave me this advice and it sucked. Now I can blame him. It's way better.
You could argue, though, that if people give you bad advice and you don't think about it for yourself, it is your fault.
You can make that argument, but the problem is then you keep thinking and thinking and thinking forever. And yeah, if you do that for random people in random situations, I agree. But actually, there's a way to split that baby without causing two baby halves, and that is to recognize authority in its proper place. I'm not going to take Father Eric's dating advice.
And I do
Right.
It's
think.
amazing. Sometimes I get asked about some of these things.
Oh, I remembered
funny.
what the thing the Collinses said that I thought was good was. They said that the Catholic Church, especially the more trad parts of it, tend to attract people who are really caught up in their like thinky ideals and compare everything in their lives to this ideal. And maybe if they would just be a little less focused on the ideal and a little more focused on the women in their area, they would get married easier.
Yeah, no, that's a thing.
So there are all these like young trad guys who won't get married because none of the women meet their like perfect ideal. And I'm sure young trad women who won't get married because the guy doesn't meet their perfect ideal.
See, that's bad framing. That's not a trad problem at all. It's nothing to do with it.
Oh, I've seen it happen.
No, I'm saying that happens outside of tradness.
Oh, sure it does. But when we're looking at specifically problems Catholics are having, that is a problem that trads are having.
It's not a problem Catholics are having. It's a problem the whole culture's having. That actually matters, right? Because if you misdiagnose it, you can't fix it. And you misdiagnose it if you put it in that frame because it's the wrong frame.
I think something that's worth pointing out here is people who are drawn to the more traditional expressions of the Catholic faith tend to be very high in conscientiousness.
Yeah, there's a sample bias there for sure. But aside from that, that's happening anyway. People are like wanting perfect mates all over the place. That's been happening for years. And most of them aren't religious. So the fact that a tiny number of them, because it is a tiny number, actually got involved in religion and they're very loud and they're very new, so they're shiny, right? So people pay attention to them, also exhibit that isn't a surprise because guess what, guys? You're drawing from a bigger pool than Christendom because Christendom receded a long time ago. Now we have a problem. But if you misdiagnose it, and like this is actually core to my critiques of the churches in general, like they receded and now they don't understand what the problem is, which is ironic, right? And all their ways of thinking about the problem and trying to identify the problem are completely wrong. And so you end up with, Jordan Peterson is Billy Graham 2.0, which is just dumb and can't be correct. Like I don't, but some people are there, and it's like I don't know how you got there.
Why the comparison to Billy Graham? Is that just like
because there's big crowds.
The Christian.
If you have a religious frame, and somebody draws a crowd, it must be because of a religious thing, right? Young concerts are concerts; they're fine, right? But you know what I mean? Like, it's successful and it's drawing people into the church, and therefore he must be a preacher, even though he's not a preacher. And there's a difference between preaching and whatever Peterson's doing, however you want to frame it. And it's important. Like, it's really important, right? But if the churches don't recognize that, they don't recognize there's different audiences here, right? I would argue there's three. You can make an argument for more. I don't think you make an argument for less. I'm open to discuss it with people, but no one's bothered. So there's definitely different things going on for different people, right? And if you don't recognize that, then you get into this, so everybody just needs to go to church nonsense, which isn't going to work. Like, everyone's already had the option to go to church, and the churches are shrinking. That should be a hint.
So how does it map with this? You guys remember this slide? Still my most successful YouTube video.
This is good.
Are the three groups represented here, Mark? Sounds like you want to talk about this. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah.
I would say that the three groups are the believers, right? However you want to define that. I really don't give a tail of an animal, right? Because I divide believers into two sets, roughly speaking, right? But I would say it's the believers, it's the crisis of faith people, right? So the people who will say were believers or had the potential to be believers, but didn't end up in the church like they should have, and the meaning crisis people, which includes the atheists. And I would say that's the minimum number of groups.
All right, so who isn't?
Huh?
Who isn't included? Because that seems to cut up a big portion of the world there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the way to divide the world, to understand literally all the problems we're having, actually, like for real. I don't, right? Because the three groups have three different approaches to the same sets of problems, right? And a lot of that is mediated in different ways. And like we can make subdivisions, right? We can go Cathodoxy versus Protestantism, and then there's three there, right? Because then there's the atheists, there's the non-believers, and that's fine. But again, the problem with dividing it that way is there's a bunch of people who are meaning crisis people who, like the atheists, are dividable into meaning crisis people and crisis of faith people. So that does, you see what I'm saying? Like,
Right.
It doesn't really map correctly if you do it that way. And not that mapping is absolutely everything, but also there's a there. But you have to have the right sets of groups to understand the problem. So if you're sitting there looking at the world from the perspective of Pastor Paul Vanderklay, Peterson looks like Billy Graham because that's the closest analog in the religious realm, right? But there's another way to look at it, which I find much more interesting. In petersonsphere.com, I've got a timeline of Peterson on there, which I think is interesting. I'll put up other timelines too, but you can look at the Peterson phenomena as no different from the phenomena of the rise of the Beatles, right? Just with different technology and on a different topic. Like the Beatles are just this musical enchantment. Peterson is an intellectual or articulation enchantment. And he's part of a larger movement where we go from TED Talks to conversations to long form conversations, right? And then he actually extends this, to in-person and online conversations, right? And like there's a progression there, a very interesting one that people don't see. And even in the TED Talk realm, Peterson's in the top 10%, or maybe it's 5% for TED Talks for viewership.
Did he actually do a TED Talk?
He's done a bunch, 3 at least, I think, if I remember correctly. So he's in that whole milieu, like for real, like progressing through it, and that's even more interesting. But if you're let's say you're Cathodox, and you look out and you see Peterson, what are you going to do? Oh, you're going to get a bunch of people on YouTube talking theology, right? Or you're going to get you're going to get a Bishop Barron, and I don't care to classify Bishop Barron. I don't listen to a lot of his stuff or anything, but it's a very different attitude. And then there's a bunch of other people, right, who are doing Bible study online and all that. So they're doing the traditional thing with the new media, and I'm not disparaging that or anything. I'm just saying that's what's happening. Right. That's also not what Peterson's doing. It has nothing to do with what Peterson's doing. Peterson didn't take an existing system and put it into YouTube. That didn't happen. Right. And that's worth noting. Right. He didn't.
You don't think he just adapted his academic lectures?
Not even close.
Why not?
No. Because he brought it into a book form. Well, first he brought it to Quora. This is actually, you got to check out the timeline. The timeline tells an interesting story. He did this thing with Quora, and it was one of the top Quora posts. So he's hitting the top of TED Talks. He's hitting the top of Quora, right? He's hitting the top of all of these things. He's hit the top of the research field, right? He's hitting the top of all these things long before he becomes famous, right? And then what happens is he distills that down. It occurs to him, I could distill this down into a book or 3 books. So he starts to distill it down into a book. And then what happens is he jumps into the political arena right around the same time, right? And so all these things are coming together. And that's reigniting his work because he does this silly biblical lecture series. But the thing that segues people into that is not the biblical lecture series. Most people are drawn in by something else. And that shows up in the numbers. So I can back that up with hard numbers. Now, there's other things I can't back up with hard numbers, but I still insist that the only reason the biblical lecture series is as popular as it is because most of those people already watched Maps of Meaning. I can't prove that, there's indications in the data as a data scientist that I can tell you, oh, there's some strong indications here, but there's no way that I can prove it with the set of numbers I have access to. Peterson
you need the YouTube backend. You need the YouTube backend.
He has the analytics. He could probably, I think you can do that with YouTube analytics. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 90% sure you can cross-reference the set of watchers for the videos. And you'll also notice the biblical lecture series isn't that popular. The first episode is huge, but the subsequent ones are not. And
well, that's every series ever.
It's usually not that rampy. It is an outlier, right? And so when you start doing aggregate numbers, actually what you should do in that case is throw out the outlier, right? Because if a single outlier, first episode, just throw that out. Take the average of the rest or the mean or the median or whatever. It doesn't even matter. The variance on that data set is fairly low, if I remember correctly. I might be misremembering. I didn't do the numbers because I'm too lazy, but like if I remember correctly, the variance is pretty low on maps of meaning both years. There are some dips, but like the variance is pretty low, and that would give you a better sense for how many. But I think when I did those numbers quickly in my head, which is completely unreliable because I suck at math, the biblical lecture series is not more popular than maps of meaning. And if you count both sets, because a lot of us watch both, then right. And so what that means is that there's a big hunger from the quote atheists, if you want to coin it that way. Although I make them meaning crisis plus crisis of faith people, I would say that those are the groups, right? And the fact that Peterson goes in and it's not apologetics, but he goes in and talks to guys like Dawkins, right? He goes in and talks to Sam Harris. Like he's got his fingers in a lot more pies than people realize. And that's part of the problem, is that it doesn't matter where your attention is pointed. If you're a crisis of faith or meaning crisis, you're going to bump into Peterson. And that is interesting. That's really interesting. You know who you're not going to bump into? Bishop Barron. And if you do, you're not going to understand a word he says anyway. So he's not going to help you because he's got different language. And there's no disparagement here, but also, you've got an audience. Stick to your audience. Peterson's audience is secular.
Yeah. Yeah, he's just well, we should just take him out then because he's an outlier. I mean, nobody can be good at everything, right?
I don't know about that. Well, I think about this often, right? You go to a company, you see somebody sort of performing at the company, and they immediately get a new position, and you're like, "No, they were good at this job. Why did you promote them?" Right? And it turns out that the way most promotions work in most companies is people ask. So it's not super reliable, but it's reliable enough. Like it's solid, very solid. And so go-getters tend to do that. They tend to say, well, my plan is to, join this team and then maybe manage it someday, right? And then that tends to happen within 3 to 6 months for some reason, right? Because they push hard. And even if they sucked. And then there's two ways to slice that thought. One is, the manager's just trying to find the best place for them. Fair. Right? And the other one is, if they think they're competent, people who are competent at one thing are fairly common, but being competent at one thing often means you're competent at something else. And some people are like Elon Musk, are just competent at lots of things, right? And so you don't want them in a job. You want them in the job that's the hardest for your business that they can also be competent in. And then when you throw in the fact that nobody knows what they're talking about and people often don't know what that looks like, and you can mistake things like luck for competence, it gets messy, right? It gets, why is this guy here? Well, everybody thought he knew what he was doing and it just turned out he got lucky. Or his last team, he had a good a good working relationship. You know what I've seen a lot too, this is going to be hysterical. And no, I'm not talking about me. I see extremely disagreeable people. They get a manager that works well with them and like actually listens to them because he's new, and that team flourishes, and they take that manager away and nobody else can deal with a disagreeable person, and that team's performance goes to crap. So it looks like it's the manager, but it's actually just a disagreeable person who happens to be right. That happens all the time. I've seen this consulting a bunch of times. I'd just be in this team and I'd be like, oh no, this is one of those guys. And they get a new manager and then bang, like that team just performs. And it's because they're listening to the disagreeable person all of a sudden, right? The manager knows how to smooth them over or whatever, right? He's got those skills. Those aren't difficult skills to cultivate. Actually, you can learn most of them if you've got reasonable management skills, which most people don't. But then the problem becomes they leave, somebody else comes in, that team is garbage, complete garbage. It's all over. And that happens a lot. So was the manager a good manager? Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe it's just a good combination because it just turns out you don't do things by yourself. Shock. I hope everybody's sitting down for that one. So yeah, and people get confused with that. And so if you look at Peterson, for example, outside of, oh, well, Peterson's really good at X and there's only one X, you're going to miss all the things he's doing. Because apparently he's really good at talking about biblical stories in a compelling way. He's also really good at giving lectures, which is a really strange combination, actually. It's extraordinarily rare. And then it turns out he's really good at elucidating political points and abstract concepts like freedom, right? And liberalism, such as
he's really good at the data parts of science.
You're right. And he's really good researcher, like a top-notch 1% researcher. And like these are just unusual things, but like he's probably following a pattern, hint, hint. And people who follow patterns tend to be really good at lots of stuff. Because it just turns out that everything's really the same at the pattern level, and there's only a handful of patterns, and really that's it. And that's why some people seem super competent, right? And some of those things, I mean, you still have to skill up, right? Seeing the patterns won't help you. Like there are tricks to reading white papers. And if you know what they are, you can blow through white papers like nothing without having to read the whole damn thing. But not everybody can do it. So, maybe you can't do that trick. Fair enough. But also knowing the pattern of a white paper and not doing the trick does not help you. Right? So it's more than one piece. And you have to put the pieces together in a way that works for you, because it just turns out you're different. And I don't know what else to say.
And another complicating wrinkle is that they'll say a person of Peterson's capabilities actually has to meet a moment in which their capabilities are needed.
Yeah,
which is not guaranteed. So there could be a lot of people who are we'll say have the same qualities, but just didn't come at the right time or in the right place. Or maybe they chickened out when they were given an opportunity.
Or maybe they don't have the full set. So like the John Vervaeke crew, who I knew, they were like, I mean, their basic thesis was John Vervaeke is better at Peterson than everything Peterson does. Now, I could argue, I don't want to say objectively, independently false on lots of grounds. But I understand where they're coming from. And they very much tried to make Vervaeke's message surpass Peterson's message. I mean, it's how you got Vervaeke. It's the guys who were, they're all buddies, right? They all knew. The videographer.
Bunch of Canadians.
University of Toronto people, right? But like the videographer for some of the Maps of Meaning stuff and some other stuff, I don't know all the stuff he did all of John Vervaeke's stuff. Like stopped doing Peterson stuff to do it for John Vervaeke. Right. And so they were trying to follow the Peterson pattern. And of course they couldn't because they didn't know what it was. Right. And obviously I love John Vervaeke's work. I'm really familiar with it. Right. And I understand, what he was doing and what he was getting at and how all that was going. But he's not Peterson. Right. He's not talking secular. He's inventing new language. Super helpful, right? Science of meaning. Yay. Now you can understand Peterson if you understand Vervaeke's science of meaning. and make a few tweaks. Yeah, but the 4Ps model, if you tweak that slightly, markofwisdom.org, I have the slide up. If you tweak that slightly, amazingly useful for understanding what's going on. Just ridiculous. Do all kinds of interesting prescriptions and predictions, and they work really well. And they have to be extended. There's a lot more work to do, but that having that framework allows that work, and then you can understand what Peterson does, and then maybe you can do some part of that or help him and do some part of that in some way, right? So that's the difference.
Yeah. Well,
Like-
it certainly is an exciting time to be alive.
It is. It is. Well, we've got all kinds of people trying to create a religion. A lot of the people that like Vervaeke's work are trying to create a new religion because he says scientifically we should, right? And one big difference between Peterson and Vervaeke is Peterson's a pragmatist who uses standard language, and Vervaeke makes up a bunch of terms to help you understand some more abstract concepts. And there's nothing, again, like that's great if you're doing science on things. It's not helpful if you need to clean your room.
It's
Yeah.
almost like Peterson is fundamentally a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, and Vervaeke is a cognitive scientist.
I've never heard a clinical psychologist, and I've known many that do what Peterson does. They don't give pragmatic advice.
No, he's definitely better at it, but that's what they're supposed to be doing.
Maybe.
The whole
I
point
don't
of clinical psychologist is works with real people.
Yeah, but they're not supposed to give advice. That's part of the problem.
Well, that's true.
Right. So
That's
he's
why he
not
Do you think that?
not filling that role.
I think Peterson, when he was, I mean, he talked about his clinical practice a fair bit, and he was quite intent that you couldn't just tell people what to do.
Right.
Like he was, right, which is, but it's different when you have a whole group of people who've paid money to see you on stage. Like they're going to be a little more susceptible to, like he's tailoring it for the audience. People who are already Peterson fans, he can give them more advice because they paid to come here to hear that kind of stuff.
He doesn't. I mean, you
Whereas
could make
a lot
could
of,
make
I
the-
think, therapeutic relationships.
But
Well-
you pay for the therapeutic relationship. So, I mean, I think the magic isn't what's actually happening, right? Like, and this is actually my critique, not only of psychology, which I find absolutely reprehensible as a discipline, and also banal and basic, but also of a lot of other things that are going on in different spaces, right? If you let people just tell their story, that generally makes them worse. And that's the problem, right? Because they begin to believe their own story, right? And Peterson actually points at this, right? There's that whole thing where the woman was abused by her brother sexually, and then it just turns out they were kids, like actual children. It's like, no, that didn't happen, right? You cast this rationality frame onto two irrational beings, right? And then like instantly everything fixes.
Basically, what I'm trying to say is that Peterson probably treated audiences differently than he treated clients.
He did, but right, and it's worth thinking like, well, what's the magic? Because he definitely tells people to clean their room.
Mhm.
And how does he get away with that? I mean, he talks about this like I'm not clear how I get away with this, but actually it's not that hard.
He just
And
paints.
knows
He
what
just
he's
paints a
doing.
good. Yeah, he just paints a picture of what your life could be like if you actually cleaned your room and why that might be better. So he's proposing an ideal for you to strive after rather than just giving you a set of procedural steps to follow.
Right,
Well,
and
it
he's not
speaks well of
telling you
him
to
that he's willing to let go of his preconceptions based on what's actually working.
he's not telling you to do anything. He's saying, imagine if you did this and these things happen. Because that's literally all you have to do for people. Is say, imagine you wanted a thing. And then imagine what you would have to give up to get the thing. Right? That's his writing course in a nutshell, right? Only write it out. And then he does past, present, and future, right? Those are the three authoring programs. And so You can do that verbally with people, and it actually works fairly well, right? The other thing is you filter for people who are looking. So somebody's looking for advice, and you just happen to have advice that's relevant to what they're looking for. I mean, that was this Quora article. Then you can take a Quora article with, I think it's 46 or 42 points. I don't think it's on Quora anymore, and distill it down into 3 books, which is what he did. So you can do that, right? But then those people are looking for that, right? They're already looking. And so part of what he's done is he understands what people are looking for. He says, oh, there's lost men. Oh, okay. Why are there lost men? What's going on? And he analyzes it correctly using his research skills and just paying attention. Like the number of people that don't count that would give them an answer to me is stunning, because it's like 99.9% of people, right? Like I remember, so in Boston, every once in a while they close the tolls on the Mass Pike, right? Which means you can drive through, right? At speed. There would still be a backup through the tolls. And the people in Boston would continue to insist that the reason for the backup was the tolls. And I was like, do you not understand that the backup is A, on the other side of the tolls, B, continues for like, I think it's 2.5, 3 miles, and C, goes backwards through the tolls? And apparently none of these people understood that, including people who drove the Mass Pike, because I talked to them. They're like, oh, we're going to get rid of those tolls. It's causing all the traffic. I'm like, there's no way the tolls are causing the traffic. Have you counted the number of stopped cars on the other side of the toll booth?
Well, isn't
Did it
there a
occur
weird
to you?
situation
Yeah, I mean,
with the toll booth usually?
No, I mean, it's 100% clear that it wasn't the tolls. 100%. And you know what? They took
Right,
out the
Yes,
tolls.
it's a perfect situation.
Huh?
it's what a lot of these traffic problems are caused by a turn that people can't see around.
Right.
And that's where they hit the brakes. And once 5 people hit the brakes, 5,000 people are going to be hitting their brakes if there's enough traffic on the road.
Any change in speed of a certain number of people will cause gaps in traffic, and gaps create stops, right? Because the gap has to come from somewhere, right? So there's a time lag across the traffic. But like the number of people that couldn't understand some simple relationship like that, the number of people that can't actually count the number of cars on the road, and the fact that it's changed, right? Like people they don't do these basic things. Whereas I think Peterson just takes the time to do all the basic work, which is let's look up the numbers, let's do the research, let's count the number of people, let's talk to people, and not believe their first answer, but try to validate that answer. Because when you talk about the Big 5 personality, I don't know if you guys have taken that test, but they ask you the same thing. It's some ridiculous number of questions, right? They're asking you the same thing over and over.
Always do that.
Right. Well, good tests do, right? Because they're filtering you for your own bias, because well known, you don't rely on self-report for anything. Now go
and
back
in it, like phrased slightly differently. And like you notice sometimes and you're like, ooh.
Yeah, sometimes you do.
I answered wrong last time.
Right. And that's what the test is for, right? Because you could talk about that in terms of perspectival shifting. But imagine the number of studies now, if you go back and look, that are self-report. Self-report is the least reliable way to do a study, according to everybody. Like every source I've ever read.
Like asking someone if they're Catholic and how often they go to church, and using that to determine how religious they are.
It can't have an accuracy high enough to give you information. Can't. Unless it's a whopping outlier. Like unless it's like 100% or 90% or something. But it almost never is.
Like if you want to know how much somebody drinks, you should talk to their wife.
Yes.
You'll get a much
or their friends, their best friend,
or their friends that they go drinking with. Yeah. But somebody else, because what you see, it's like if you're too close to something, you can't actually see it properly, right? Like you put your hand up to your face, you really can't see your hand.
You can't
That's
see
just
you. Right? That's why we outsource our sanity. It's one of the things Pastor Paul says. It's great. Yeah, we outsource our sanity. Think about that. You want to be an individual. That means you want to be insane. That's what that means. Good luck. Also, you will be. And if you're trying to be an individual, the odds that you're all together are zero. I'm just warning you now. Right? Like you're probably crazy about something if you're rebelling enough to try to be an individual. You know. That's the problem. I don't think Ixnan's point about what Peterson's telling you it is valid enough, we'll say, right? Because Peterson tells people things that they should have already learned from their fathers. I would argue he doesn't. He might give you the outcome of what you should have derived from what your father told you, but also I think people telling you things is garbage. Like I think that you exemplify your father. He doesn't tell you much of anything, and the fewer words he uses, the better. By the way, and I think that's it. Like I mean, everybody used to talk about the strong and silent type. Interesting that you put strong and silent together. What a weird combination if you think about it, right? And that's why when people are boisterous and saying like, "I'm going to punch you out," I'm like, "Go ahead," because zero of them will ever do it. Sorry. That's just the way it works. Like now, if you get into a discussion and it escalates, that's different. But if somebody just kind of walks up and like, "Hey man, I punch people out," it's like, no, you don't. That's the one thing I know about you now. You don't do that. Thanks for the data, right? But because self-report is your self-image projecting outward onto the world. And that's what it is. And some people, maybe they don't care about the subject, so it can be accurate. But for most people, it's just their fantasy, right? It's their video game avatar. It's not actually them, right? I don't drink that much in my video game. Of course, in real life, I drink 3 times as much as I think, because how do I know how much I drink?
Yeah, you start to forget after a while.
Exactly. Ever meet a blackout drunk? Man, are they fascinating creatures. It just you engage with a blackout drunk and like you can easily lose your faith in humanity. It's like, how do you not remember all this stuff? Oh my goodness. Like this is major events that occurred to you in physical reality and you have zero recollection of it. Wow.
Yeah, it's a dark place, all right. They call it a blackout drunk and not a whiteout drunk, even though both would be equally blinding. Pay attention to that. Our language here is actually pretty helpful. Somebody blacked all of that out because it wasn't because they were being good. It wasn't because they were, such a dazzling example of human excellence that people couldn't stare at it properly and understand it.
Yeah, I'm grateful that I never have met a black.
Me neither. No. It's I don't need to. Sally Jo has informed us that there are too many activities. I'm very frightened of this now.
Is this about me being too loud and distracting from the talkie-talkie?
No, not at all.
It definitely isn't. Actually, StreamYard figured out how to filter you properly now. So.
Oh, excellent! I'm cutting out a sewing pattern, and I forgot it would be noisy.
Oh. Sally's complaining that I'm spending too much time broadcasting on YouTube.
2 live streams, 2 live streams, 2 book clubs. She can't handle it.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Sally.
Yeah, that's why I'm not as involved as I'd like to be in the book clubs, because they're coming at a bad time and there are too many, and that's just how it goes.
Are you saying that you're touching grass?
Something like that. I
See,
mean, at
here's
least
the thing.
I'm touching paper.
Paper's kind of like grass. Problem with Washington, D.C. is I don't have a lawn here.
Yeah, I do now. It's really nice.
Where it's concrete everywhere.
It's bad. It's
Oh
pretty
my
Yeah.
goodness! Like Like, I tell you what, it's like I'm not going to complain near as much about living downtown anymore. It's just like the contrast is like, yeah, okay, downtown Fargo's kind of loud. Washington D.C. is louder. Downtown Fargo's got kind of a lot of pavement. Washington D.C. has more. Uh,
All pavement. It's horrible.
yeah.
You better deal with Sally Joe's complaint here, Father. I don't know.
Yeah,
Mark's
Mark.
availability. If you liked it, you should have put a ring on it, Sally.
That doesn't work. She's already married. And I can't believe you said that to a married woman, Father. Catholics are terrible people.
Yeah. It definitely was. Oof. Big oof there, Mark.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm okay with the post hoc rejection by the married woman or the kid. It's cool. And the artist. Ugh, artists are the worst.
The bald have no standards.
Oh wow! Ouch!
Oh,
What's
boy,
that
she's just doing an entire class.
Wow. I know. I'm sorry, Father, that I roped you into that somehow. That's terrible. I apologize to all my bald friends.
Just going scorched earth out here.
I guess. Wow.
I think she's actually mad.
I don't know.
If I was actually mad about something, I wouldn't be typing YouTube comments on a live stream. I would ask you where you want your new door. I've got my pickup truck here.
Blackout drunk, man. It's the same principle. Get angry, you're blinded.
Yeah. I had 3 older brothers. And from a young age, I learned that being angry didn't help me at all. Because they just make fun of me for being angry.
Yeah.
And then I understood what Joey meant when he said that the reason our society is going downhill is that we don't have high school bullies anymore.
Yeah.
I just got the somewhat gentler and more moderated version of that from my older brothers. And look at me now. I'm a beautiful, bald specimen of humanity.
That makes good choices.
I mostly
have excellent standards.
Very high standards. I don't always live up to my own standards, but they're high.
You know what's ironic? I've heard so many people on like YouTube and stuff and Tumblr actually make that same joke. That actually we should bring high school bullies back. People are too insufferable now.
Yep. Yeah. Well, there's lots of reasons, but yeah, if you don't understand, I mean, it's hierarchy. Understanding hierarchy and figuring out what it looks like and how to be in it or to rebel against it is important, right? Because otherwise you don't understand costs. Because hierarchy is older than trees. I mean, this is another great Peterson point.
Can you go into the costs thing just a little more?
Yeah, there's a cost to not being in the hierarchy, right? You can be an outcast forever.
Are there not other ways to learn costs though?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a cost to being at the bottom of the hierarchy, and there's a cost to being at the top of the hierarchy. Wherever you are in the hierarchy, there's a cost, right? I mean, you're specializing within a hierarchy. That's what you should do. You shouldn't try to do everything yourself, right? Even simple flat technology things like running a YouTube channel. 0 successful YouTube channels have 1 person running them. Sorry, you may think otherwise, but that is false.
You've got a huge number of people at the very minimum running the YouTube back end, right?
Mm-hmm.
They are constantly, I don't know if they're attempting to improve the YouTube algorithm. It's a really difficult problem to solve, and maybe we don't have the best and brightest on it. But there's all of that work that we don't see and that we're constantly complaining about, right? Here we've got StreamYard here. StreamYard is a business that makes it so that I don't have to figure out how to ingest your video and audio feeds through OBS.
Right.
I could spend a couple hours and learn how to do that. I wouldn't be able to do it near as well as a team of engineers figuring out just how to do it correctly the first time. because I'd have to have like a Zoom call, and I'd have to like pull the video feeds out, put it into OBS, and then shoot that into YouTube. StreamYard takes care of that for me.
Right.
So even though it's all just Father Eric's YouTube, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
just
they've figured out the YouTube interface and all the other stream interfaces well enough. And it's not perfect. You can do different things if you have OBS, and they're cooler than what, right? But also well enough, right? Good enough, close enough, and that makes a big difference. And then there's a trade-off there. Like, what's the cost? The cost is you can't do all the cool things you can do with OBS by using StreamYard.
And what's the cost? For it.
Right. And well, you either pay in time or you pay in money. That's a trade-off of cost, right? Time and money, always. You can almost always trade your time for money, and vice versa, right? And what's the cost of being a pleb who does the accounting at Google, right? There's a bunch of accountants. Maybe you're doing like some of the books for one of the divisions. Well, the cost is, you only get to see your little piece, right? What's the advantage? You only have to look at your little piece. You can probably get away with a 40-hour-a-week job, right? Whereas the controller of Google is not working 40 hours a week. I can guarantee you that, right? And so there's all these costs and trade-offs that people don't ever think about. And when you don't understand that because you're not part of a hierarchy, you just get lost. I mean, that's where the domicide comes from. John Vervaeke talks about domicide. Domicide is not knowing where you fit in a hierarchy. Not only that, but like that's a big part of domicide.
Every man just wants to have a place on the flow chart. Okay, where am I on here? Right.
You need a place on the flow chart, and that's also meaning, by the way, or at least one form of it.
Yeah. And Dr.
I want a flat world. Oh, there's a meaning crisis. Really, I'm shocked. This is my shocked face.
And Dr. Peterson taught these concepts to people. That they're really helpful. I mean, I was doing it implicitly my whole life long, but having it made explicit is kind of nice sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And some people don't seem to need it made explicit, but some people do. And maybe that's a feature of the world now, that more people need it made explicit.
I mean, we spend way too much time talking about the differences between men and women, which it would be better if we didn't have to spend all that energy talking about it.
Don't think.
But things being how they are. Oh, we're going to pull it back up again.
Pull it back up.
Yeah. Think less.
It's a good example of what I'm saying. Think less. You don't need to know the difference. So what is the cost of being in a hierarchy? It's often knowledge of the things going on further up the hierarchy.
And further down.
And further down in many cases. Yeah. And
Pope
that's
Francis
the thing.
doesn't have any idea what's going on in North Dakota. Why should he? That would be insane. Which is why we shouldn't have to ask permission to have the traditional Latin Mass in a parish church in Fargo. But never mind that.
Moving right along.
Yeah. Just before I start saying what I'm really thinking here.
Don't do that. Yeah, and that's the thing. These costs are often also advantages, right? Because it's a cost, which means you're paying for something, so you're getting something out of it. Because we're in a connected world, and you can't not do that. Like that's going to happen to you, irrespective of all of the factors. So if you're not used to it, and the world's been flattened for you, you're just unable to function, and that's pretty much what we see. Why people don't have clean rooms.
Yep, I think Neil Peart said it best. You can't have something for nothing. You don't get freedom for free. I know it was Geddy Lee singing it, but Neil Peart wrote all of the philosophical lyrics. So Neil Peart was the one who actually sat down and read Ayn Rand.
True. Yeah, not all the songs though. So.
Right. No,
he didn't
before
write
Neil
Tom
Peart
Sawyer.
joined Rush. I guarantee you. Let's look it up. I guarantee you, he wrote something for nothing.
I have no idea. I'm not a huge Rush guy. Also, Ayn Rand is a little. I don't know who understands Ayn Rand and who doesn't.
It's credited to Geddy Lee and Neil Peart. So we're both right. And we're both wrong.
There we go. Yes, Ray. Just to answer Ray's question. The progenitor of the Moby Dick Book Club, among other things. Yes.
Yeah. You actually, I'll bring up my buddy Mark a lot in casual conversation. So we're promoting each other. I don't know if I've gotten you any subs though.
I hope it's positive. I have no
It's
idea.
usually like my buddy Mark was telling me this crazy thing about Boston traffic. It's relevant stuff. He's from Boston.
That's good. Did you tell him how wonderful I was to visit you in DC?
No, not usually. Like talking about people that other people don't know, it's like you really just gotta like touch and go on that.
Yeah.
Because most people it's like describing your dreams to people. It's like, okay, what's my connection to this? How do I participate? You've got this
One thing and then move on.
Yeah, you've got this friend in South Carolina, so once the little anecdote about, Connecticut people being the worst drivers is done, then that's that. Ishmael.
Hello.
Hello, Ishmael. You're on land.
Hey, let me turn off the other side so I can hear you.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
okay.
Guys?
Hey, we're just talking about Jordan Peterson and stuff because this is the Peterson sphere. But it's an open mic, so if you've got something you want to talk about, the mic's open. That's all I'm saying.
Nothing really on my mind. I mean, I've gotten to know Mark a little bit. I did read Moby Dick a few years back in college in like a Jesuit context. So I am familiar with that. Might hop in on that in the future, but just thought it'd be a good chance to say hi, chat, complain about Washington, D.C., and I guess we don't have enough bullies.
He has been listening. He's been paying attention. Yeah.
That's what I do.
Bullies here. Boy. Did you think that the Jesuit context in which you studied Moby Dick the first time helped you understand the book?
Honestly, yes. I would say yes.
I never know what I'm getting into when a Jesuit walks
Right.
into the room because they're either like rock stars, absolutely the best and most solid, or the most like degenerate and ridiculous priests in the world. And there's no middle ground.
What's the joke about them? It's like the Jesuit is the Jesuit you know.
That could be it. Well, I was actually talking to Corey, who sometimes comes on this stream, and he said the exact same thing about Marines. That Marines are either like extremely top quality people or extremely like degenerate, alcoholic, crazy men. There's really not much in between. And I guess it just means that certain organizations attract extreme personality types, and you get both ends of the extreme. So,
Maybe.
What's that maybe mean, Mark?
Well, I mean, there's also you're measuring things that aren't equal, right? They're asymmetrical, right? Like there's lots of ways to be a degenerate. There's only one way to be awesome. Like that would be to fold it down to too few words. Yeah, and that's the problem. I think that because I know some former Marines who are middling for sure. And there's a lot in South Carolina. Like it's all freaking ex-military down here. It's wild.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Could be the case. I'm not in the Marines. I can't comment. I've got this big beard that doesn't fit underneath a gas mask. It's
You're not a Jesuit, are you?
You're not a
no,
Jesuit
no, I'm
either.
not. Just a regular old diocesan priest. I just observe Jesuits when I get the opportunity. They're the best or the worst.
We'll
They're
get you up
I
to
always
Boston.
find like the different orders very interesting, and just
Yeah.
kind of like how like the context in which they arose affects how they play out today.
and the fact that they still carry the
especially-
personality of their founders.
Yes,
Right.
very
Like,
much
yeah.
so.
The Jesuits definitely carry the personality of Saint Ignatius, right? Like this was the dude who, before he met Jesus, he was riding down the road on a donkey in Spain, and there was a Muslim he was talking to, and then the Muslim said something about Our Lady that Saint Ignatius didn't like, because even though he wasn't very pious, he still loved Our Lady, and he was enraged by it. But he said, "You know what? I'm going to leave this in the hands of God. There's a fork in the road coming up. If my donkey follows his donkey, I'm going to kill him. And if he doesn't, I'm just going to say that's." And the donkey went to the left instead of the right. And so that's the only reason that he didn't challenge this Muslim to a duel, right? And then he took it.
Awesome story, though.
Yeah, right. And it just tells you all about Saint Ignatius. Another, he was a soldier, and he took a cannonball to the knee, and the first surgeons that worked on his leg didn't set it quite right, and so he had a bulge in the bone after it healed. And they wore like these stockings in those days. That was the fashionable clothing, and he had this unsightly bulge in his leg. So he did what any normal person would do and had the physicians break his leg again without anesthesia and reset it.
In a day and age, also, when that was not guaranteed to help,
Actually work.
and definitely had a chance of just killing him from infection if something went wrong.
And so when
What year was that? Like around the
16th century.
16th?
1500s is what I was.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. I was
1500s.
going to be like 100 years off.
Yeah, it happens, right? And while he was lying in bed recovering, the only books that they had were the lives of the saints in the Bible. And he would sit there and he would remember all of these chivalric stories, and he would think about doing those sorts of things. And then he would read the Bible, and he would think about, imitating St. Francis and St. Dominic, and imitating Christ and St. Paul and all of that. He noticed finally that when he meditated on Christ or the holy example of the saints, he felt peace. And when he meditated on these romantic stories, he felt discomforted, disquieted. That was the beginning of his conversion. He also went into a cave for a month and came out with the spiritual exercises, which is a 30-day retreat. And people still do that to this day. It's kind of like a standard thing.
They offer
pray
students
by
like
lying
little
down.
micro ones. Like if you go to a Jesuit
Yeah.
university, you can experience some of that. Is Kairos specifically Jesuit, or is that a wider practice as a retreat?
I don't know about.
I know my
Kairos.
siblings'
I would have to
diocesan
look at
high
it.
school does it, and they're not particularly Jesuit affiliated.
Okay.
Yeah, but everybody
Okay.
steals from St.
I
Ignatius.
win.
But that
So-
means nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That.
Everybody
sorry to interrupt.
steals. So St. Ignatius would pray by lying on his bed with his eyes closed, right? Now, what happens to most people when they lie on their bed and they close their eyes? They fall asleep. But he was just so crazy energetic. That's how he would calm his mind down enough to actually be able to pray and focus. He just got this real extreme personality who founded the Friends of Jesus, right? We call it the Society of Jesus in English, and it makes it sound a little more solid, I guess.
Normal?
But but he's just like, no, we're just the friends of Jesus, all right. Just like Saint Francis, he literally founded the Little Brothers. Like that's what Friars Minor means, is the Little Brothers, and then we insist in English in calling them the Friars Minor, which sounds a lot more regal, solid than the Little Brothers.
I was actually going to ask
Solemn.
you if you caught the Shia LaBeouf movie about Padre
With Padre
Pio.
Pio.
Yeah, and
I
just
did
like
not.
what you
I did
thought
not hear
about
good
all
reviews
of that.
about it.
It's all. I mean, honestly,
I
it's
did
not
not
a
hear
bad
good.
movie. I mean, I don't know the. I don't have that background, so I don't know what they would be objecting to.
I just heard that you think you're getting. So there's a whole genre of saint movies. A lot of them are pretty bad, but they're all kind of like devotional, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. And this movie wasn't that.
No.
It's the like, is this something I could show in a 7th grade CCD class test?
No, this is like a Shia LaBeouf passion project, and like the way Mel Brooks,
Yeah.
or sorry, not Mel Brooks, Mel Gibson does passion projects.
Yeah, so I heard it was like a lot of political stuff from early 20th century Italy, and
Yeah, that's mixed in for sure. I mean, I was more curious about like what you think about Shia and his experience.
I'm really glad that he's
like
not.
That's what led
so,
to the movie.
Yeah. Really? No, he was shooting the movie. I thought
from the other way
he was
around.
learning the Latin Mass. He was learning the Latin Mass in order
I heard
to
that like
embody.
he was like dabbling, and then that's what got him interested in the movie, and then the movie moved him towards Franciscan as like a specific order. But I mean, I didn't pay too much attention to it. That's what I'm probably wrong. But either way, I'm curious about like whatever it is that happened. I'm curious about your thought as like what that points to, if that's meaningful.
Yeah. So here's my understanding of how it happens: is that Mr. LaBeouf's life was kind of a mess. He was in all the news stories in all the wrong ways. His reputation was going down the line. He gets offered this Padre Pio role, and he feels like it's his last chance. So he really wants to do a good job on it. And so, in order to actually understand Padre Pio, Shia really gets into the roles that he's doing. He does kind of that method acting thing, which sometimes really works out well for him. Fury was an amazing movie, although really difficult to watch. So he started hanging out at a Capuchin monastery in California and learning how to say the traditional Latin Mass. And both of those things got inside of him. One, the brothers were just showing him brotherly love, welcoming him into their life, listening to him and giving whatever kind of firm masculine presence that he needed to help straighten him out a little bit. And then also just learning the Latin Mass and feeling the power of that. He doesn't say it, obviously. He's not a priest, but like it drew him to actually just wanting to go at it even when he wasn't filming. So yeah, I mean, that just seems like those two things are the best that the church has to offer, is the lives of holy men and women, and our liturgies and our art. When we just focus on those things that are good and right, good things happen. I'm also, I don't know, I've got intensely mixed feelings about that interview he did with Bishop Barron, because what happens a lot is these actors become the Catholic representatives, right? And it's like, okay, on the one hand, we want people to be able to represent their faith, but when you already have a big platform, you might not be ready to go out and represent the faith. They made me do 8 years of seminary before they let me go out there and, be a priest, right? And so there's a few Catholic figures that get trotted out as the Catholic figures. Mark Wahlberg is one of them. Mark Wahlberg is just, like when the Pope showed up and we had the big World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia, Mark Wahlberg had to come out and say a thing because he's one of our most famous Catholics, right? And he's figured out how to navigate that pretty well. He's got his feet pretty well underneath him, and he doesn't talk about things beyond his
challenge.
I've seen him do
Have you seen that
ads on YouTube
screenshot
for
that
that
goes around every Ash Wednesday? It's like join Mark Wahlberg's 40-day challenge because he was invited on like USA Today for Ash Wednesday to talk about Lent, and that was what they put at the bottom of the screen.
Who's the guy who
Mark
does
Wahlberg's
Jesus in the
Wahlberg's
Chosen show? It's him and Mark
John-
Wahlberg.
Jonathan Rumi is another one.
Him and Mark
Yeah.
Wahlberg, they're on some
He's in-
like. I think it's because I've been like hanging out and talking to some of you guys, but now I'm getting a lot of like ads for like Hallow the app. And I was like, man, they don't do enough data research, do they?
No, but they don't.
Like,
All
I mean,
sorts of
everywhere
Catholics.
advertising wise.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, that also I'll take that back because who knows? Maybe someone will get the app. So
That's how you do it. But also, I mean, I like to point out, like, what you described, Father, was, hey, when you see the exemplar of the church, you follow it. Well, why aren't people following? Because they don't see it. Right. That's the recession of the church right there. That's you go to the Basilica in Columbia, South Carolina, and it looks like the most unremarkable building in the world until you get inside, and then like, holy mackerel, these windows are gorgeous. Can't see them from the outside. That's a
Basilica, not just a cathedral.
It's a minor basilica, and it's not their cathedral, I don't think. No, it's not their cathedral.
I think
their cathedral's in Charleston. It's the Diocese of Charleston.
Right.
I think it's interesting when you have beauty on the inside that doesn't show on the outside. I mean, it reminds me of a couple of different instances. Usually, like it's a minority faith of some kind.
Right. It is down here.
It is. Let me ask you. Okay, so it is a minority faith down there, so they're not advertising it in a certain sense. Like I'm thinking about signaling because you're bringing up like
United
why not having
States.
it.
This is the United States. We're in the Baptist South, dude. This isn't Maryland. Okay, you want Catholics? Go to Catholic Town. Father Art's in Catholic Town. The place is wild. I went out there and I'm like, what even is this? This is unbelievable. Oh wow, I could just hang out here. This is like there's all kinds of Catholic things everywhere to just.
I mean, you got to check out the church that's on the north side of DC. Then that's like almost in Silver Spring. That's a really nice one. I think that's Catholic.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. You talk about the Basilica of the National. Yeah. I took Mark around that. I actually went there on Friday.
And then where did we go, Father? Where did we go? Which was only a few blocks away, which was basically walking distance from where your church is.
The Franciscan Monastery of the Holy Land?
Right. And what's next to that? Like 2 blocks down the road. There's another one, right? There's all these monasteries. They're all in the same neighborhood. It's wild. It's completely wild. It's great. I mean, that was one of the things that struck me when I went to Charleston. My friend took me when I was in the middle of taking care of my mom, and we went on the horse-drawn carriage ride, which is huge in Charleston. They've got like 3 different companies doing them, and they're taking us around and saying Charleston, South Carolina, I believe what they said was has more churches per capita or more churches in the square area than any other city or town in the world, or something insane. Like, and there are churches everywhere in Charleston. It's absolutely bonkers. And they actually did a thing that I had never heard anybody do in my life. They made a joke about even letting the Catholics in. And I was like, whoa, you couldn't say something like that in New England, man. That would not fly. And it was very casual and very ha to the Catholics. Like, Catholics in the United States are a minority religion. It's not. And that's the thing, though, that they're not exemplifying. When you have a hidden beauty, you're destroying the world. Actually, that's going to be my contention. I'll argue that with anybody. That's fine. And that's the recession of the church. Like, and I don't, I mean, we can blame the Catholics explicitly, sure, but like all of the churches, right? Of course, the Protestant churches in general are at a disadvantage because they don't believe in beauty because they took iconography out. So they're definitely destroying the world. So yeah, that's where the problem comes in, is that when you don't have that ideal, that exemplification, things degrade because no one's striving. Because why would you? Like, you only have to be as good as your neighbor if you're not striving after the ideal.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark doesn't like brick churches. That's basically what it comes down to.
No, I'm fine with. Look, the brick church up the street is fine. They've got big stained glass windows. It's on the corner. It's gorgeous. It's prettier than the Catholic church, which is the same brick, just no windows. Not that I
I'm
can
trying to
see
think of like
outside.
something witty and poetic and pithy to say, but like all I'm gonna say is just like everybody likes stained glass, and brick is ugly, but concrete is worse.
Yeah, agreed. Well, you should be building them out of cut stone. Damn it! What the hell?
It's expensive, Mark. And sometimes you just need a place to be under a roof.
It's not expensive. It doesn't cost any money at all. Stone grows in the ground, man. You can just go dig it up. It takes a lot of manual labor. That's what it takes. It doesn't take any money at all. There's a confusion.
Mark, did you see the Michelangelo movie on Amazon? Because they spend it's first of all, it's absolutely beautiful. They show him working on not the David, but the one that he did for the Catholic fathers, like tombstone thing. It's like the one of Moses, I think, with the tablets. And they show him briefly working on the Sistine, but there's a very long extended scene that actually shows the amount of work that it takes to cut a piece of marble, and it's just done very beautifully. And it also, it's like, Michelangelo's there, which reminds the audience it's not like he just ordered it and it came in over on Amazon.
Right.
You actually have to go and pick the marble you want, because not all marble is good marble.
Right, and even if you're not doing all the chipping yourself, because
you can mess up the stone.
doing it.
Yeah.
Right. There's a sculpture school or whatever it's called in Croatia, and it was on the island we were staying on. So I checked it out. It was very interesting to watch them work. It wasn't easy. Was that Moses? Does he have 3 tablets or 2? Sorry.
You mean 2 tablets or 3?
2 tablets or whatever.
2 tablets. 2 tablets.
Yes, and the movie's called Sin, by the way. It's just SIN.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, I have Amazon. Maybe I'll check it out. I got a backlog of stuff to watch, but I'll put it on the list.
I don't know how your Italian is, but subtitles work.
My foreign languages are 0, so yeah. I can barely speak
Is
English.
Python a foreign language?
No. It's in my blood.
Sorry, it would be, you're a real programmer. It would just be C, right?
Everything should get coded in C with assembly for the hard bits. Yes. Can confirm.
Oh boy.
All those other heretics should burn their computers in hell.
Yes. Yes. Maybe that's the problem. I learned 8 programming languages, and so I can't do human languages.
I don't know how these things work.
So Mark's a robot. That makes sense.
Pretty much. Why do you say that, sir?
Oh, that's all your intentionally left vague health problems, is you just refuse to download the new firmware.
Yeah, you need a patch, dude.
I need a patch for my immune system.
Don't be open sourcing that.
He won't he won't download the patch. Download the patch, but come on.
That's possible.
I mean, at least
it's gonna mess up my workflow.
At least
Well, if it's an immune thing, wouldn't that make it an antivirus?
Yes. Very good, Emma.
With your on your channel with like the little eye thing, it's like you're modding yourself.
Modding myself, maybe.
Yeah.
Just because I like
Download
steampunk.
mods.
Steampunk.
that's a very.
So wait, if you're a
Very
pirate
cool.
captain with the steampunk thing, that makes you
That
from
means
like
his-
Treasure Planet, basically.
Basically,
it
Treasure
doesn't.
Planet. Yeah.
No.
No,
Treasure
it's basically
Planet's
Treasure
cool.
Planet.
No, steampunk. No. Steampunk.
Treasure Planet is an amazing.
That's solar punk, I know.
People read that backwards, including the people in that genre, because they don't really understand what they're saying. Trust me, I know them actually. Right? If steampunk, like if the thesis of steampunk is correct, they would still all be pirates. Like that's their dream, is to be rebels, and one rebel archetype is piracy. And so that's why in steampunk they all are pirates. Like that's, if you look at steampunk people, they're all doing the piracy thing. It's really funny. And once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. You're like, oh wait a minute, they're all rebels in some fashion. They're all pirates and rebels. And I have a Halloween costume where I'm a steampunk doctor, which is just hysterical, by the way.
Wait, did people not
I
notice
actually
that
know very
steampunk
little
were
about
pirates this whole
steampunk
time?
other than its general vibe.
What was that, Ray?
I was gonna say, I want to meet these people who didn't notice right off the bat that these people are pirates. It's like they're wearing leather and boots and silly tri-corner hats,
And they're flying around in dirigibles that are pirate ships with balloons on top. Right. They don't. And they always have monocles or some sort of eye enhancement. Always.
or a cane.
But I don't, like, they're in it and they don't, like, hippies aren't self-aware at all. Like they just, so they're all just rebels. So they don't, that's what rebellion is. Lack of self-awareness right. Because self-awareness would be where you fit in the hierarchy. That's what it would be.
You think Gen A or Gen Z are going to have rebellion in the same way that we've seen typically?
No,
There's only one rebellion left. You're just going to rebel into being normal.
Right.
Thanks,
So that's what I'm
Jonathan.
asking about. Because some of the statistics are trending that way, actually, which is funny.
See, the statistics I saw is that like 18-year-old girls are becoming liberal feminists and 18-year-old boys are becoming like conservative chads.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even
Which
the
is
slang
really
that
not
they use
gonna-
is like all about that too. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's which is really not going to help them pair off.
No, it's really not.
It's bad news right there.
I mean, it's not like birth rates matter at all.
Nope.
We can just make robots.
That's why the Collinses are so attractive, because they're giving a solution to the birth rate problem by creating their own stupid religion. Because I do like that, Father. I gotta agree. They have a poor grip on everything. Yes, that's the best way to think about them.
So I'm
One
gonna
thing
put
I
you
would
down
say
as
for
it's
them
like-
is
no
that
for the
they don't
robot.
think other people should adopt their stupid religion.
Putting it out there and telling anybody about it undermines that thesis. But sure, I will take their self-report for it.
They do kind of think other people should make up their own stupid religions.
Right.
Oh, that's actually worse.
Yes.
Oh.
It's
But
Protestantism.
also, if you want to just stick with an established religion, that's fine too.
Right. They're their choice first people. Yeah. They're not even people.
So it sounds like they're picking D, all of the above.
Right.
Yeah, they are every time.
It's a lesbian relationship with Protestants. That's all it is. He's just not a man. I'm sorry. It's just, you can't talk like that.
That's harsh.
You can't. It's true though. Yeah, the truth is harsh. That sucks. Everybody wants the truth until it's harsh. Everybody wants reality until it disagrees with them. I don't care. Sorry.
Some tough love coming from Mark tonight. I'll also put him down as a no for the robot wife. No robot.
Yeah. Mark would be a pretty hard no on the robot wife. They'd be too similar to each other. You know, you gotta have a little bit of variety.
How did this happen? That was amongst friends.
You're a robot.
Now the scales have fallen from my eyes.
No one is safe.
No one is.
Everybody's
Even
a fan of
Sally.
reality until it disagrees with them.
Oh, Emma! Of all the people. All right. I see how it is. Thought I could trust
Okay.
Emma.
How do you like
Well-
them apples, Boston boy?
I'll tell you what. Let's just call it quits. I don't think this is getting any better. It's just degenerating, and I'm getting tired. So good night.
It's your bedtime. Bob.
And
Yeah, I need to.
God bless you all. God bless you all.
Good to see you all.